Okay, and welcome to part two of this little page orientation, I guess I'll call it. I've switched over to English Writing 108. The first part concerned 300. So I'm going to go over a few of these. As you can see, there is still some links here that are soon to be active. But one of the things that is different than 300 is you're going to see this instructor contact information, and you're going to see a Zoom link, okay? And I have a meeting ID here. You can either copy this link or you can just go directly from here. I also have the Zoom link in the announcements, I believe, for both 300 and 108. But this is unique to 108, the Zoom meetings. Okay, so the 300 can be used kind of on its own as what they call asynchronous class, meaning you can just go through the modules. That's one of the reasons why it's so neatly laid out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the modules, because that's kind of how it's designed to be consumed. 108 is a little different in that we will have some live sessions. I have a breakdown of sort of what the requirements for that are in both the syllabus and the and other places here on the introductions. I think in both, but it's definitely in the 108. I'm still in the student view here, so I'll explain that in just a second as we get to it. But once again, what I would do is I would go either to the announcements if I were a student, look to see if there's new, but it'll probably give you an alert for that. But there's a couple of posts there already. And it just tells you about the Zoom meeting at 10:30. If you're curious about the attendance, I may go over that a little bit now, but I'll definitely go over it on Tuesday when we meet. If you're still not clear on sort of how the absences and how to attend Zoom meetings. Okay. So even though in the student view, you're not really able to see a whole lot from here because I'm recording this prior to the 24th, I happen to know what all of this stuff is. Some of this is very similar in terms of breakdown as the 300 first week. But one of the things you may already notice is that I've broken this down into weeks 1 and 2, right? So I put a couple of weeks together in this module. Right, and it's released there. And then there's a pilot assignment, which I will go over very soon once the class starts, if it's still confusing, because it's not ready to unlock until the 31st, which is like a week later. So that's so that you can clear your brain a little bit so that you don't think of the pilot assignment as something that's looming over your head. It's an orientation series of modules based on research that the library puts together. That's a quick explanation. But it can be a little bit overwhelming, but you have a lot of time to do it. It's an open assignment. You have weeks and weeks and weeks to get it through, even though, it may, if you don't pace appropriately, that could be a problem, which brings me to my next point on the 108, the pacing. Okay, so module 1, and I'll go over this again probably in the Zoom meeting a little bit. It's designed to be consumed by you over the course of a couple of weeks. Okay, so this discussion question you will want to get done pretty quickly, at least the initial discussion question, so that students can respond. It's, once again, all of the stuff in here is not super heavy lifting. Okay, so it looks like in 108, it looks even worse initially when you look at it, because it's like task, quiz, discussion, task. But honestly, this is all pretty self-contained. Okay, meaning that you can go through this and just reference itself, unlike maybe the 300 where it may be referencing things that you have to look around a little bit more, because it is embedded within some material that I'm trying to give you. But in this case, it's really just that. It's just an orientation, and you have a couple of weeks to go through all of this. Obviously, things like the discussion question, I'll push it to finish a little earlier than not. Because of the timeline associated with discussion questions, and I'll go over that a little bit more from my perspective next week. But this is really just to get you involved in what is going on with the class itself. Okay, so just to get you integrated, and these are designed also with the Zoom sessions in mind. So even if some of these are not tagged to individual weeks, the Zoom sessions are really sort of where we can keep the pacing going, which is why the modules themselves are sort of paced a little differently. Meaning when I release something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have something due right then and there. It just means that I've released it so that you can get that series of information together and then have any questions that you would have on Zoom. Okay, so for example, and if that's not confusing enough, for example, I was a long time ago, I would go into this and say, okay, I have my Zoom meeting or meetings for the week that I know I'm going to go to. So if I get confused, I can always rely on that. I can always pause wherever I'm at and ask a question about it. But if it were me, and I'm pretty aware, say I've taken these kinds of classes before, or if you feel pretty confident, I would know that I have basically a couple of weeks to finish these modules. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Is that the ideal scenario is that this is going on in the background while you're attending the Zoom meetings. Okay, so the Zoom meetings you don't really have to keep track of because you always know. I mean, you have to keep track of them to show up, but you always know that once a week you should be in front of a computer or in front of a screen at 10:30, right? Either Tuesday or Thursday. So that's your obligation, right? And that's where some of the different kinds of activities are going to take place, and that's where my attendance gets counted. But in the absence of that, on my own, I'm seeing this stuff floating around in the background. Okay, so for a couple of weeks, I know that I have to walk through this. Okay. On the 31st, which is sort of in the middle of this couple of weeks, I know that this is going to get released. So if I have a second, I may want to go over and look at this, right? Check this out, the pilot assignment, and see if that's something that I can do on my own, and if it looks like, and like I said, it's information that sort of floats in the background, most of it, until you start doing research. Okay, and that's more in the second half of the semester. So I've designed this to be due more like maybe October 4th ultimately. You don't want to wait until the night before because for very particular reasons that I'll explain probably when the class gets started. But it's a series of 6 modules that I make you do. Each one is about 30 minutes long, give or take. Some people finish earlier, some people finish later than that. And it's based on research. It's an online sort of orientation toward research that the library has put together. That's sort of the best way I can explain it. But the key here is that if you spread them out over the 5 or 6 weeks that you can do them, before we actually get into research, then it's pretty manageable because these are just going to be floating in the background. I'll probably keep reminding you, I may send you an email, say, hey, if you've gotten on top of your pilot assignments, stuff like that, or even the mentor in the class, which we will have a mentor who I'll introduce you to as well. He may, follow up with that too. So this, once it gets released, it doesn't mean it's due right away. It just means that it got released. I didn't want it clogging up this other stuff for the first week or so. You have enough stuff to do without having to pay attention to that. But once that gets released, you are free to pay attention to that, see if it makes sense. If it does make sense, and if I were, like I said, a conscientious student, I would know that I still have time to do this, and then I have time to do that, but I want to start paying attention to my pacing, right? Because I don't want this to be done the night before. I don't think it even can really be done the night before unless you want to sit in front of a computer screen for 4 or 5 hours just taking quizzes and absorbing information, which I don't know, that's probably not the best policy. Although, whether I can keep you from doing that, I don't know. But I would really recommend against doing that because it's designed to sort of be just absorbed. So that's the 31st. Okay, so as I'm going, say the first couple of weeks after this I finished this up. I've attended my Zoom meetings for a couple of weeks. I may have gotten a pilot assignment or 2 done. Module 2 opens on the same day, but you may not want to look at that right away because you may not be done with this. So finish this first. This is basically more grammar stuff. And some of these release dates may be a little bit more flexible. I was toying with the idea of just releasing this later, but I do think that releasing this at the same time, giving you about a week to look at this without worrying about these other stuff was probably enough time, because all of these are some of these grammar modules can be done sort of independently of whatever lessons we're doing in an individual week. So when these two modules get released, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, if I'm done with these, then maybe I can get to that. Okay, but if I'm not done with these, then maybe I can wait a little bit on that. And the due dates on these, I think I have some here, like October 4th, as you can see the journal entry, October 4th, October. You have a while to put this together, okay? So this is designed, once again, to be sort of a little bit more self-paced, right? So just because it gets released on a particular date doesn't necessarily mean it's all due. You don't have to run and do it all right away, unless but I do release them early because I do think that this is just sort of what I would call evergreen information, meaning information that you can, that isn't tied into a particular lesson plan that I have. The one, something over here that I have already here, it's also set to be released as some additional information. And then that's kind of where the 31st unlocking stuff it ends, okay? So what's happening here, if you're paying attention, is that the first module gets released. You're paying attention to that. The second module gets released. Then all of these other modules get released sort of right on top of that. But this is sort of the priority for the first couple of weeks. And then these are just sort of like you start them, and then you go back to them. You start them again, you go back to them, you start them, you go back to them. Okay, so just make sure that you keep going back to them, and then this batch of stuff will make a lot more sense as we go through the semester. And then this other batch here on the 7th, that's sort of the second batch that gets released, and then I'll have probably a couple more after that as the semester progresses. But as far as the pacing goes, this is a little bit more self-paced than the 108, at least as far as this online pagination goes. But the Zoom sessions are really sort of where we would get more of where I would more pace you. Okay, so this stuff on here is designed to get you going. Okay. I hope that helped. I hope that didn't confuse you too much. I will post these and then answer any questions that you might have. But if you do have questions, then maybe I ask that you just sort of explore it on your own, because technically the class opens on Monday, but by Tuesday you don't really have anything due. So if you want to even wait till Tuesday to get anything started, I think you'll still be all right. Okay? All right. Thank you.